Please bless this time as we look into this very important topic of should Christians keep the Sabbath? What does that mean? So Lord, please bless this time in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so we're going to look into this topic. What should Christians keep the Sabbath? And if they do, what does that mean? What does it mean to be keeping? And what does it mean to be the Sabbath? Because there's a whole broad scope of meanings within that. So we'll look into that. A quick summary of last week, which we looked at the hallmarks of God's true church. And I took a really beautiful sermon by Pastor MacArthur, and I just boiled it down to his main points. So this is up there for your reading. But it's amazing that within this passage of Matthew 16 that he used that passage as a first mention of the word church, and from that you could get these 7 principles, which stands really for all of time, and it's really hallmarks of God's true church. So, and then I ended with that a true measure of an authentic church is its Christ likeness, and this is in Ephesians 4:13. So for today, Pastor Adam has some white cards. If you want to write down what beliefs do you have about the Sabbath, you can do that. And I'm going to collect them at the end if you want to write that down. And also, what questions do you have about the Sabbath?
Belief.
So the instruction...
What belief we have on the Sabbath?
Yeah. What do you believe about it? Like, is it true? Is it not true?
It's going to take a much bigger...
Well, be elegantly precise. But you can send me an email. So if I'll be passing the attendance sheet, if you want to write down your email, and you can send me your beliefs. But basically, what I want to do is understand what you may believe about the Sabbath, and what do you think is true. So when I say believe, mean that you have convictions that is true, or not just what you heard, but that this is what you agree with. Okay.
Like yes or no?
Well, yes or no to what? Be very specific, because it's like, for example, I believe that we should observe the Sabbath by, let's say, worshiping on Saturdays. That's a very specific sentence. So this is what I mean by what do you believe in? Do you believe, let's say, in the Christian Sabbath? I'm going to collect these cards at the end. So when I go through the material, if that spurs your thinking to some thoughts, you can write that down as well. So what do you believe in? Is that what are your convictions about that? And on the other side is, what questions do you have about the Sabbath? So is it what you do and don't do? What are the laws? And I think it'll become more clear as I go through the material as to what questions you may have. Okay, and then you can just start writing them down. So, if you want to, you don't have to. I just want to get a feel for how much either you believe or not, and then what do you know? Or I think a big thing to help me is what questions you may have, because I hope to answer those questions in the next number of weeks as I go through the material. So does the Sabbath apply to Christians today? That's the question. Oops, wrong direction. So the problem statement is, does the Sabbath apply to Christians today? And if so, how is it to be applied? The Sabbath is very broad. What does it mean to keep the Sabbath? Okay. So it's a very broad subject, and you'll see in a minute just how broad it is, how many opinions there are. So here are some Bible facts for me to, I just want to note this for you. Nowhere in the Bible does it say you go to church on the Sabbath. Okay? These are, in my opinion, these are statements of fact. Okay? There's no record, biblically or historically, that anyone knew about or kept the Sabbath before the time of Moses. Okay? Meaning that Adam, Seth, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, those patriarchs and others, there's no record of it in the Bible or historically in archaeological records that say that they kept the Sabbath. None of those people. It's not in the book of Genesis. Okay? So to me, that's a fact because we can't find anything on that. The word Sabbath is not in the book of Genesis. All 50 chapters. Right? The Sabbath, the fourth commandment, is the only commandment out of the 10 commandments that is not repeated in the New Testament. Okay? Jesus and the apostles did not say to observe the Sabbath. If you look at all the New Testament books, they never say to do that. Also, Jesus and the apostles did not admonish anyone for not observing the Sabbath. Okay? That's not anywhere in the New Testament. So these to me are just some of the facts. So as you think about what your idea of the Sabbath is, keep these in mind because these are, I think, facts that that are true. And then you need to weigh these against what your beliefs might be. Okay? So just want to set that expectation there. And lastly, there's no aspect of the Sabbath in the gospel message. There's no aspect of the Sabbath in the gospel message. If you look at the gospel message, whether it's 1 Corinthians 15, 3-5, the word Sabbath is not in there. It doesn't say what day or anything. So that there's no aspect of the Sabbath in, when you try to give the gospel to somebody, there's no aspect of the Sabbath in it. Okay? And if you find something in the Bible, let me know. Okay? But I just want to let you know this is what I have read, that as for those who evangelize and share the gospel, I don't think you ever point the Sabbath as part of your speech or your argument.
What? That's the first thing I acknowledged. Yeah, you're right.
And Peter, when you say gospel, you're reading the means of salvation. Right?
Yeah, the good news. Yeah.
That's been used so much.
Yeah. Okay? You just don't hear the word Sabbath, really. In the New Testament, if you think about all the occurrences of the Sabbath, is in reference with Jews worshiping in the synagogue. But the apostles and Jesus really never talk about Sabbath in a way that is of saving faith or anything like that, right? So these are just some facts to think about as you try to calibrate your mind as to what the Sabbath is. So, if we do keep it, what do we keep of the Sabbath? The Sabbath is just not going to church on Saturdays. Okay? So, should Christians keep the Sabbath? Some say no. There's no application at all about the Sabbath. So that's one view. Some say yes, in some respects. Well, should Christians keep the 10 Commandments? Some say yes, some say no. And some say that the 10 Commandments do not apply to Christians. Jesus fulfilled the law. Some people say that. Some people say yes, and then you go one step further. Do the 613 commandments in the Mosaic Law apply to Christians? So you hear the number 613, and I'll have a slide on that. But basically, the 10 Commandments is like, another term for it is the Old Covenant, or the Old Testament Covenant, or the Mosaic Law, and I'll get into that next week. But basically is, well, there's 613 commandments. So when you say, I'm to observe the Sabbath, is it just the worship on Saturday? Or is any of the 613 you also going to obey? And then how do you choose which of the 613, right? So within the 613, some say yes, some say no, and some say some of the 613. Also, here are the 10 Commandments. And so the big one that we're going to focus on is number 4. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Right? And just a point on the 613. So the 613 is often cited. Perhaps you heard that number in sermons and so forth. And there's really no verse that says that 613 is the right number. So there are other people that have counted as well. So there's no universal agreement that is exactly 613. So this is from godquestions.org on this question, what are the 613 commandments? You can look that up on the internet if you want. So when you count how many commandments, sometimes a commandment's repeated in Deuteronomy with Exodus, so you don't count that twice. Sometimes there's 2 commandments in one verse, things like that. So it's roughly that number. Then Maimonides in the 12th century listed out all 613, and he's credited with that number, 613. And he did that in the 12th century. And he also broke it down that 248 of them were positive, 365 of them were negative. And this article actually lists all 613 with verses. Okay, so it's a big number. And then we look at what verses contain those 613. They gave credit to 2 of them in Genesis. There's 110 in Exodus, and that's where the 10 Commandments are in. In Leviticus, there's 243, and that's where there's a lot of the various offerings and so forth. And in Deuteronomy 200 repeats some of that. So this is the 613, and this all is within the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. Some of the 613 is Exodus 12:48. If a stranger shall sojourn with you and keep the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised. So if you visit someone over Passover, you better be committed. Yeah. Then they may come near. But if they don't want to participate, it says, but no uncircumcised person shall eat of it, the Passover meal and so forth. Okay, so that's quite a commandment. Now, Exodus 20, verse 10 says, on the 7th day is Sabbath to the Lord our God. So on that day, you should not work. But you also have to tell your sons and daughters they don't work. You have to tell your male and female servants, all your servants, do not work. Somehow you have to control your livestock not to work. Whatever that means, okay? And even the person visiting you within the gates, that they're supposed to rest as well. So there's a lot of commands within this 613. And Leviticus 4 just says that if there's some sin, you might have to bring it to the whole congregation at the tent of meeting. It's a very long passage, but there's some really detailed stuff here. There's one about revering your mother and father. There's one that if you see your brother's donkey or ox fall, don't ignore it, but help them lift them up. So you can't do that work. So, so there's a bunch there. But one observation I want to make is that within the 613 commandments, there's no mention of worship or singing or praising Yahweh on the Sabbath. Okay? It's about rest and a number of specific rules. So when somebody says, I'm going to worship God on the Sabbath, because the Bible says so, well, there's no linkage of a specific verse that says you do go to worship Yahweh on that day. So as you read it, think about these things. It's like it's really interesting just what is the purpose of the Sabbath really within the 4th commandment. Okay? But it's not about worship. Okay?
So worship could be construed as a word.
I don't know about that. I mean, but it's just not mentioned as part of an activity.
But you can kind of, it almost seems like you could say that. I mean, like, I don't know. Yeah, it's That's it.
Yeah, I'll get into a little bit of this vagueness that's within all these laws, okay? So, let's see, did I go backwards? Oh, okay, Exodus 20:10 says the same thing. And then Exodus 35:3 says, you shall kindle no fire in your dwelling places. So if your house is cold or something, you can't kindle any fire. So I don't know how you keep warm. Maybe just blankets or animal skins or something. I don't know. You're not supposed to sell any grain on the Sabbath. You're not supposed to carry a load on the Sabbath or bring it to the gates of Jerusalem. So you're not supposed to basically lift up things and do work. So you can't move your sofa, on the Sabbath, but you have to do not carry a burden out of your houses. So you kind of have to stay within your house. So it says, so just kind of in summary, you shall not do any work. I mentioned about son, daughter, servants, and livestock, kindle any fire, buy any grain, carry any load. But the vagueness of this, like you say, Donald, is well, how do you interpret exactly what that means, right? So this leads to a really wide range of interpretation, right? And this is where legalism came in, and this is where the Pharisees came in. and the Pharisees would say, well, you can't comb your hair, or you can't do certain things. It was incredible what they had, and they're the guardians of the law, so to speak, right? So this interpretation really gets to where they were in command because they were the teachers of the law, right? So here, when it says Exodus 35:1-3, you shall kindle no fire. So this is a real sign at the Sinai Hospital. The Sabbath elevator. I mentioned that. So on the Sabbath day, the elevator automatically stops at every floor, up or down, so that when you walk in the elevator, you don't have to push any button. So you won't be doing any work.
Oh my God.
So you're not pushing a button to do work. You're not pushing a button to light the light, which it could be interpreted as kindling a fire. So, but this is like today, this is still there, this Sabbath elevator. So a lot of Jews like to get the lower floors. All right, so the views of the Sabbath, should Christians keep the Sabbath? Just focusing on some of the aspect of it is that the strict adherence, there are churches that meet on Saturdays. Okay. As far as the other 613, I don't know, but some of them meet on Saturdays. And the no application at all, those people would say Christ fulfilled the law. The Sabbath does not apply. Right? Matthew 5:17, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. This is Jesus speaking. I have come to abolish them, but not to abolish them, but to fulfill them. So they say, well, Jesus fulfilled the law. I don't have to observe the Sabbath because of Matthew 5:17. Now, Hebrews 4 has an interesting passage. It says, verse 9-11, so then there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. Remains something in the future. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rest from his works as God did from his. So let us therefore strive to enter that rest. So this is a exhortation to strive toward that rest. So it seems like there is a Sabbath in the future, a rest, right? So I'll get into that passage later on in this series. But so this is some of the verses and some of the thinking behind. They could be one end or the other or somewhere in the middle, right? Yes, Jane.
Why do you say it's in the future, since it says there remains a Sabbath rest for people?
Yeah.
But why do you say that it's in the future?
If you read the passage in Hebrews 4, it talks about where some of the people, the Israelites, got an opportunity to enter into rest. But then it's also kind of exhorting, say, well, there is a rest in the future for you, and basically it's like there's a way of coming to faith that you will enter rest. Okay, and this is talking about eternal life. There's a lot to explain in this passage, and that will be later on. But I want to just point that out because there's some people that think this way, and this is a true statement. There is a future rest. Okay. A hint for you guys, in verse 9 it says Sabbath rest. There is a translation that doesn't have the word Sabbath in it. It just says rest. Okay? So for all those King James lovers, all right, they got it right, I think. But anyway, I'm going to explain that in due time. But so that's why there's just a lot of thinking of like, well, how do we reconcile everything? This is actually a very complex topic. So the strict adherence, worshiping on Saturdays, there are a number of churches that worship God on Saturday, even today. Right? So here's 4 of them: Seventh-day Adventists, Church of God, United Church of God, and Seventh-day Baptists. There's actually more, but these are the 4 of the larger ones. So Seventh-day Adventists is the largest by far, almost probably over 23 million now. It's hard to get some data on these, so those are what I could find as of those dates. So, but Seventh-day Adventists in North America is about 1.25 million, but worldwide is 23 million, so it's a lot more outside. Church of God is about 4 million. United Church of God, about 15,000 members, and Seventh-day Baptists. And in looking up a lot of sources, it seems like a lot of Seventh-day Adventists, they go to church on Saturdays, but they may not know why, but they just go. So just a comment. So these 4 Sabbath-observing churches, some facts about them. So Seventh-day Adventist Church was influenced by Ellen and James White, also Joseph Bates. Church of God also believed in Adventism, and that they kind of went in the same path to a degree. United Church of God by Herbert Armstrong, and Seventh-day Adventists really don't know who were the early influences, and they kept the date way back in the Reformation period, 1600s. They say they point back to that, but they don't really point to any specific person within that time to influence their becoming a church. So the founding dates, 1863 was Seventh-day Adventists, and interesting, if you look at the Church of God, they were formed about 20 years later. So they were also from the Millerites, from this guy named Miller that predicted the second coming of Christ in 1844. And Ellen White, they believe a lot of her visions and writings, but Church of God rejected Ellen White's visions. So they try to stay more true to the Bible in that sense. 2 of the 4 believe in the Trinity, but the middle 2 do not believe that the Holy Spirit is a person, is one of the persons of God. So they believe that the Holy Spirit is a power, a presence of the Father and the Son. Okay? So those are very big differences. And one more slide on this. 2 of the 4 believe that you receive forgiveness of sin in baptism. Okay? Yeah, so the first row, right? Seventh-day, it varies that you might get some. Only the United Church of God believes in observing the festival days. Their view of the rapture is that the second coming and the rapture happen simultaneously. Okay? And the first three on the afterlife of the unsaved is they believe they go into basically non-existence. They believe in being annihilated. Okay. The first three abstain from unclean meats. So, and they do believe in tithing, which we don't. United Church of God is so generous. 10% to the church, 10% to festivals, and 10% to the poor. So 30%, yeah. So yeah, and then many of them don't celebrate Christmas or Easter. Okay. And polity is that this is how they govern their church. So Seventh-day Adventist is by representative. Church of God is congregational rule. United Church of God is elders. Seventh-day Baptist is congregational. And many Baptist churches are congregational rule today. Self-perception is that the first and third column believe that they're the only true church. Okay. The other two, second and fourth, is not. So I just want to give you just a glimpse as to these churches. You can look it up on your own some more. So does the church apply to Christians today? And this is what I'm going to cover today. There are many opinions, many views, and some people think that the Ten Commandments is binding for all people for all time. I'm going to look into the Westminster Catechism and the 1689 Baptist Confession. Look at those two documents that talk about the Sabbath, because actually a lot of the churches believe in that even today. And these are back in the 1600s. And some people use Exodus 20:11, which is part of the Ten Commandments, that the Sabbath is a creation ordinance. You may hear that term, and I'll explain that. And then we'll finish today with looking at Genesis 2, verses 1 to 3, where God blessed that seventh day. Okay? So there are many opinions, many views on the Sabbath. It's amazing how many. This is just a small sample, but I put these up there because if you look at the upper left, Understanding the Sabbath, a documentary, it's almost 40 minutes long, and it had 1.2 million views. So a lot of people look at that. No fire on the Sabbath, that's one of the elements, what do we think? And then in the middle, top middle, should Christians keep the Sabbath? A national debate. So this is almost a 2-hour debate 3 years ago with 765,000 views. So if you really want to exhaust more of the resources, you have to spend 2 hours and listen to that, decipher what is good and bad and what, the arguments. So there are a number. Another debate here, 432,000 views 11 years ago. Another 2-hour debate. So what did they talk about for 2 hours? I don't know if I want to click onto those. Yeah? But what we will look at next week is the one in the middle, column middle. Should Christians keep the Sabbath, the biblical truth? And this is from a channel called Unlearn the Lies. So this is a 13-minute video, but what I'm going to do is distill it into just charts. And he has 5 questions he's going to answer. And what I'm going to do is present to you his views of it. And I want you guys to think of, is he right, wrong, you agree, disagree, okay? So I was just picking one. But this is how many just out there. If you just type it in, there's just so many. Actually, Cliff this morning said, I got a book on Christian Sabbath if you want to read it. I was like, oh my, another book. So, the Ten Commandments, is it binding for all people for all time? And some people, and I've seen this many years ago where they break down the Ten Commandments to the first 4 is your duty to God. and the next 6 is the duty to neighbors. To try to do like God and people, and then we ought to do these things. So I hear about that, and it just seems like it's something that we should strive to obey. But I don't hear that much more, not that much more elaboration about it, other than that, right? But what I want to answer the question is, are these 10 commandments binding for all people for all time? So we need to look at the context of when this was given, right? So Exodus chapter 31, verses 12 to 17, talks about giving of these 10 commandments. So starting in verse 12 says, "And the Lord said to Moses, you are to speak to the people of Israel and say, above all, you shall keep my Sabbath. For this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I, the Lord, sanctify you. You shall keep the Sabbath because it is holy for you. Everyone who profanes it shall be put to death." Okay? "Whoever does any work on it, that soul shall be cut off from among the people." Such a serious language, right? 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is a Sabbath, a solemn rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day shall be put to death. Okay. So, but verse 16, it already is reiterating what's said earlier. "Therefore, the people of Israel shall keep the Sabbath." Okay. "Observing the Sabbath throughout their generations as a covenant forever. The sign between me and the people of Israel, that in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and earth, and the 7th day he rested and was refreshed." So many times over this passage is saying this is for Israel only. So when people say, well, the 10 Commandments is binding for all people for all time, well, that's not according to this passage. Okay? There are some things that might be similar that's repeated, let's say by Jesus in the New Testament, that we should obey, but don't point to this as today's Christian that we ought to obey this in that sense, because this is for Israel. Okay? I want to make that clear. And it says that in Exodus 31. Okay, next is the Westminster Catechism, written in 1646. And this was a confession of faith. And here is this Westminster Confession of Faith drawn up in the 1640s by mostly Presbyterians and Puritans at Westminster Abbey, regarding the standard of doctrine for the Church of Scotland and many of the Presbyterian churches throughout the world. So there are many other church groups, including Baptists and Congregationalists, that adapted to this as well. So this is a very much a referred to document. So within it, there's a number of questions. I think it's well over 100, maybe 107. So which is the 4th commandment? So they quote Exodus correctly. What's required of the 4th commandment? Keeping holy to God the set times appointed in His Word. Holy Sabbath to Himself. Which day? Now here, read this answer. Which day of the 7 has God appointed to be the weekly Sabbath? Here's their answer, or in this document. From the beginning of the world, that's in Genesis 1, to the resurrection of Christ, God appointed the 7th day to be the weekly Sabbath. And the first day of the week ever since to the end of the world, which is the Christian Sabbath. So they break it up into 2 parts. The beginning of the world, Adam, all the way to when Christ resurrected, Sabbath is Saturday. After He resurrected all the way to the end of time, it's the first day of the week. That's what they're saying. Okay? And they introduced this term Christian Sabbath. Right? Okay, that you don't find that term in the Bible, Christian Sabbath. Question 60, how is the Sabbath to be sanctified? So how do you do that? Their answer is that this is a day of rest, even from worldly employments and recreation. So maybe you can't like play football or something, I don't know. Spending time in public and private exercises of God's worship, so it's like corporate worship, except in so much as to take up in the works of necessity and mercy. So if an animal falls in the hole, you would save them, right? But it does say about work. So what is forbidden in this fourth commandment, according to this document, is that it forbids the omission or careless performance of duties required. You can't, profaning a day by idleness, you can't stay idle, even though you're not supposed to do work. And then also, you're not supposed to have unnecessary thoughts, works, words. And it's like, well, how do you do that? So it's like, it is odd, but these are the exact words in this document, right?
They're not in the Bible.
Yeah, they're not in the Bible, so they're this is what they wrote back in 46. So the 1689 Baptist Confession of Faith, I think a lot of the Baptist Convention even observes this today. So 1689, chapter 22 talks about, the title is A Religious Worship and the Sabbath Day. So this is the title of this chapter. So paragraph 7 talks about, as it is the law of nature that in general a proportion of time by God's appointment to set apart for the worship of God. So by his word, in a positive, moral, and perpetual commandment, binding all men in all ages, he has particularly appointed one day of 7 for a Sabbath to be kept holy unto him. Okay. So that's a very all-inclusive, right? All men for all ages. From which the beginning of the world to the resurrection of Christ was the last day of the week. From the resurrection of Christ was changed into the first day of the week, which is called the Lord's Day. And this is to be continued to the end of the world as the Christian Sabbath, the observation of the last day of the week being abolished in the last day. So here is really being influenced by the previous document. It's almost the same wording, okay? And same kind of thing. Prepare your hearts, have all your common affairs kind of in order, so that you can observe this this holy day of rest. So, in fact, this document is so influential that this is the view of many Puritans. So when you look at what did the Puritans believe? They believe this. Okay. So, as we break this down, it just says that, well, what do these Puritans believe? They treat the Lord's Day as a Sabbath for Christians. They impose on believers many of the restrictions you find in the Old Testament against defiling the Sabbath. They see doing any activities, entertainment, anything like that as a violation of the Sabbath law. And the classic Puritan view, so this is, many still view this, they call themselves Reformed today. So there's a term for this called Christian Sabbatarianism. Okay, this is what they believe and what they do. So as you think about all this, and I took the 2 paragraphs there. So these are the things I have issues with this confession. Set apart for the worship of God. As I mentioned, that's not in the Bible, right? That's in the Old Testament. It says, a positive, moral, and perpetual commandment binding all men in all ages. This confession of faith doesn't say what is positive and what is moral. What does that mean? It just says a positive moral. It's like, it doesn't help you with any guidelines as to what to do with it, right? And again, binding for all men and ages is not right. The the last day. Sabbath is on the last day of the week. Again, setting from the beginning of the world is not right. That worshiping God changed the first day of the week is called the Lord's Day. That is technically really not right. And later, in later classes, I will point to passages that talk about what did happen on the Lord's Day. Okay, you can infer this, but it doesn't specifically say that. Christian Sabbath, that's a term that's not in the Bible. And then we ought to keep from working. So this is these are problems I have with these two paragraphs. Yes, Fred.
I was just wondering, is conversation or discussion encouraged in here at all in this stuff? Because just about every other one, I have questions and comments, but everyone's silent, and I'm not sure if it's acceptable to speak in here.
I do accept a few questions here and there, but not to have a number of them where it kind of makes it interrupting a little bit. So, but a lot of it with the cards that you can write down the questions, and I will try to address them. But if there's a couple that you have,
Take a whole book.
yeah. So,
A card isn't going to do.
well, you could send.
100%.
Well, you can send me an email, but if you have a lot of questions, then we probably have to have a discussion after class, because I try to be clear on these findings. But if you have a number of questions on, then it's like, well, yeah, then we have to see what is your viewpoint, what is your source, and things like that, and we could talk about that.
The source here, just staying in here, there's tons and tons of questions just within the Bible.
Yeah, so write down the verses that.
It can't. It would take me weeks to write down all those questions.
So you're.
I'd like
Yeah.
to speak them though when they come up, but that's, it's.
Well, that's where you have to take a notebook and.
Or you can meet afterwards maybe with interested people.
So, but I like to answer your questions, but I want to make sure that they're vetted as well to align with the lesson, right? So here, these are some of the issues I have with this Baptist Confession of Faith. So, so one of the topics that comes up is Sabbath a creation ordinance? Some people say, well, Sabbath was instituted during creation, is why that we can reach back to that and say, well, Sabbath began there, and that's why it applies, since the beginning of time. So let's address that. So here's Exodus 20, verses 1 to 11, where God is speaking to Moses, saying, these are the first 4 commandments in this passage. So I just want to do it for context that this is the first 4 commandments, and then the 4th one is the longest within these 4, verses 8 to 11. So this is the 4th commandment. And as you read it, you say, well, remember the Sabbath day. This is what God is telling Moses to write down. Keep it holy. So keep it separate. 6 days you shall labor, do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. So this is what this day is for, is set it aside to be for the Lord. You don't do any of the work that you would normally do during the first 6 days. On it, you shall not do any work. I already read this before. Son, daughter, servants, livestock. And then verse 11, this is where they really picked up on, well, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that's in them, and rested on the 7th day. So they refer to this creation. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So by them saying, well, this is what happened, God, you did, and you rested, and you blessed the Sabbath day. Well, you just didn't mention it was Sabbath day in Genesis 2. But since you blessed that day and you blessed this, then that's why they say the Sabbath was back in Genesis 2. Okay, that's their thinking behind that. So if you just look at these 4 verses, what's the Lord instructing the Israelites to do? Remember the day, the Sabbath day, keep it holy, setting it apart for God. Don't do any work, daughters, servants, livestock, and even any visitors do not work. So the Lord blessed this. The Lord blessed the first 7th day in Genesis 2:3. He had 6 days of creation. The 7th day, this morning, that's the first 7th day. Okay, so he blessed that. Well, now he's also blessing the Sabbath, which is also a 7th day. Okay, so it's just saying that he blessed this day like he did that day. Doesn't mean that that day is also the Sabbath. You can't make that leap. And that's what they're doing. They're making that leap. So the Lord rested on the 7th day as an example to follow. He rested from creation. It's all done. He rested. That's an example that for you on your 7th day, you ought to rest. Okay? And then note that the Lord did not call the first 7th day in Genesis 2:3 a Sabbath. It doesn't say that. It just says that he finished his work, he rested, and he sanctified it. So as we think about this 4th commandment is focused on man. What is God's instructions that man should do? Not that you reach back to, oh, God did this, so it must be the Sabbath back then. Okay. And it turns out there's a precedence to this passage that helps us to understand this is really about for man. This is consistent with the very first time Sabbath was mentioned in the Bible, which is Exodus 16. So this is Exodus 20, but back 4 chapters earlier, the Sabbath was first mentioned. So what does it say? This is Exodus chapter 16, verses 22 to 30. So this is where God's telling Moses to say to the Israelites, this is what the Lord commanded, so that tomorrow, the Sabbath day, is a day of solemn rest, holy to the Lord. So what you do is you bake, boil, whatever you do, lay it aside, keep it to the morning. So this is talking about gathering the food in the wilderness, and that you lay it aside in the morning, and then and if you do that, Moses commanded, even though you made it the day before, the next morning, whatever you made is not going to stink. It's not going to have any worms in it. That's what it says, right? So then Moses said, well, then you could eat that today, for today it's a Sabbath, and today you will not find it in the field. So you don't go gathering like you did the other 6 days. So 6 days you gather, 7th day, which is a Sabbath, there will be none to gather, because God gave twice as much, but you gather twice as much on the day before so that you have enough for the Sabbath day. Verse 27, on the 7th day, some of the people went out to gather. They did not listen. They did not find any food. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath, therefore on the 6th day he gives you bread for 2 days. Remain each of you in his place, let no one go out of his place on the 7th day. So people rested on the 7th day. So this is an example that the Sabbath is a time for rest, and you don't work like the other 6 days. And then 4 chapters later, it's written in the 10 Commandments. So this is the first mention.
Peter, didn't you do kind of the same thing? It just kind of reminds me of manna. You know, when he was feeding the manna in the wilderness.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And then he said, well, one day he's going to make double so that the
Yeah.
next day they don't have to go out.
Yeah, this is the reference to the collecting to the manna. Yeah. Yeah. So what is this? What is this Sabbath? What do they do? It should be a day of solemn rest. You know, they refused. They should keep his commandments and his laws. So the instruction to man on a Sabbath is a day of solemn rest. Holy Sabbath to the Lord. You shall remain in your place. Do not go out. So don't do any work like the other 6 days. Okay. So this is where I find that it's really important, where you don't read into this is reaching back to creation. All this instructions in Exodus is for man. And it just happens that God blessed this Sabbath day, and he's reaching back to creation to point out he's setting an example to rest. Not that going back to Genesis is Sabbath. Okay? I got the animations backwards. So what did we look at so far? We saw many opinions and views. The Ten Commandments is only for the Israelites, right? And the Westminster Catechism and the 1689 Baptist Confession talks about Christian Sabbath, do not work, right? And then we noted that Exodus 20:11, they try to use it as a creation ordinance, and it is not. You don't link that. So Sabbath is not a creation ordinance because it's not mentioned in Genesis, all right? So I want to wrap up this lesson today with looking at this account in Genesis 2. What does it mean? What does it mean on God's seventh day? Right? So Genesis 1, starting in verse 3, says, "Then God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light." That's verse 3, and I jump all the way to verse 31, to the end of the chapter. "And God saw all that he made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and morning the sixth day." Verse 1 of chapter 2 says, "Thus the heaven and the earth were completed and all their hosts. By the seventh day God completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made." Okay. So what can we learn from this? So creation was completed in 6 days. There's no such thing as creation week. There's no seventh day to make it a full week, right? God did not keep the Sabbath on the seventh day. What he did was he ceased creating. He rested. Okay? The account in Genesis does not mention or imply going to a place to worship God. There's nothing that says that. There's no synagogue or church at the time. Synagogues didn't start really till about 400 BC. There was no such thing as synagogues until then, until the going back of Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay, so there was no synagogues before then. They were still restoring the temple first. Okay? And note the emphasis on this passage. It says the emphasis on God doing the work, not Adam at all. Okay? At this time, there is no work for Adam. It was God who rested from his work. But Adam had no work to do. He had work to do after the fall in chapter 3. So the beginning of chapter 2, the reference is not about man resting from his work, it's about God. So you can't link the fourth commandment, talking about man resting, to God resting and say, oh, that's the Sabbath. Okay, so this is why it's really important that it is God that rested from his work, not Adam. There's no work for Adam. Okay. And I mentioned before that there's no record, biblical or historical, of anyone who knew or kept the Sabbath before the time of Moses. Okay. So as we think about this passage, what is really the key points of this passage? What is the significance of the seventh day? The seventh day in Genesis 2 is a unique day. It's not like the other 6, where God created something each day, right? This is the first seventh day. And in the Bible, the first of anything is of extreme importance. This is the first seventh day. God completed his work of creation, and it was very good. Well, why was it very good? There was no sin. There's no sin present in Genesis 2 chapter, in the chapter in the beginning. Sin did not come into chapter 3, right? So there's no sin. So God saw his work was good. There's no sin. He blessed it. He sanctified it, setting aside this day, the first seventh day. So I want you to take home with this message. I increased the font size. Because the first seventh day is the first day that man and God were in a right relationship. In a right relationship in the fullness of the earth's environment without a trace of sin. So here, the seventh day, not only is God and man in a right relationship, but all the creation has been made. It's all been complete. And there's no sin. This is the ideal that God wanted. And this is where, if you go to Revelation, this is the point where the restoration toward this scenario is going to happen. It's really beautiful the way the Bible is of, if you trace all the things that are happening in Revelation, a lot of it is to point to the restoration to this environment. Okay. So this serves as a type. So this is the first seventh day. This serves as a type of relationship that is ideal between man and God and all the world. And this is where man is at rest with all his aspects. There's no sin in his life, and he's rest from any, not only labor, but he's also rest from like any guilt, any other things that could really impact him as a person, as a soul. So when we think about, and if you even look back at the book of Daniel, where it said, God said that he will enter rest. That rest is not just resting from your labors of the decades of service, but it's also resting in that you're going to have a right relationship with me, God, because you don't have any sin also. Okay? So this to me is the takeaway for the significance of this Genesis 2. This is, if you think back at the verse in Hebrews 4, talk about the future rest, this is the rest that the Hebrew writer is talking about. That future perfect relationship, that ideal relationship that God and man can have. Okay? So this is the takeaway. All right. This finishes the lesson. If you have any questions, you can either write on the card. It's kind of small. I forgot to bring my index cards. Or you can send me an email. And if you haven't already and you want to sign up for the email distribution, you could write that down here. Okay? All right.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah.